Welcome back to another TSTerra Plays Terra video. Today's video, I'm going to go over kind of more changes that have happened to Terra since I've been gone. I've sat down and talked to Deezy for a good bit to understand these changes a bit better, and just to go over things that have happened in the game, as well as just about every year I do what Terra needs to just be better. And I'm glad to see that the devs have actually in some form have been incorporating decent changes, but there's still stuff that they could do to make the game overall better. So we're gonna kind of go down a list that I have just kind of typed out, and I do apologize if it looks like I'm reading from it, because I kind of am. But yeah, we're just gonna go down this list. So the first thing is just overall gameplay and changes that I'd like to see and that have happened. Is one thing is the Vanguard limitation. There's a few ways to go about this, but I've never really been a fan of the Vanguard limitation. I think in a way it should be kind of removed, but it is needed to stay in the game for reasons. I've just always despised the idea that once you hit your 16 Vanguards, that you don't receive gold from completing any dungeons. And personally, I think this can be reworked in some way. The quickest response is just to make it not affect the gold reward. Yes, players can reset dungeons and they could get more loot this way. If you reset Bahar and run it, you get a good amount of gold plus the dungeon drops. But I've always thought it was stupid that once you completed 16 Vanguards, mind you, you could go kill BAMs and that could stop you from receiving gold from a dungeon. I just don't like that system. I like Vanguard rewards. I just think they could improve this system, and I know a lot of fan servers were improving it. Overall, Terra console should really take a look at this, and it's something that's been neglected. The next thing is dungeon drops. Dungeon drops have, as a whole, gotten somewhat decent, but the biggest thing that, could be changed is honestly adding more card boxes and adding more books. Cards and pets have been in the game for a long enough time now that personally I think they need to add more boxes, and especially for cards, this would help the free-to-play players catch up to the pay-to-win players. And overall, even pay-to-win players, there's a lot of players that haven't unlocked all the cards. And just cards in general need this because they're so time-gated. There's not that much that drops, and it's just kind of a predicament. There's not that many ways to get cards, and even though now they've been adding card boxes to so many stores and everything else, it just still doesn't feel like it's enough. Yes, it's meant to be a long grind, but I think they could rework the card system a bit. And even though all the reworks I've thought of, they're just not the best. And honestly, the best thing they could do is just increase the drop rates for cards. Same thing for books. Pets are actually a pretty decent system, all in all. I think the roles of pets and the way pets work is fairly good compared to a lot of stuff in the game. But I think just a book increase would actually help solidify anyone who is kind of behind on pets catch up. The next thing I want to go over is damage. Damage has had a huge balance change, and even though this is cool for DPS, this causes major issues for tanks. So anyone who hasn't played, or if you don't understand what has changed, basically damage was calculated in the sense that it was considered diminished return. As you would get more and more damage percentage, sure, you had percentage from each piece. Certain pieces would combine all into grouping, and the return just wouldn't be as high. Well, now damage is just a flat increase, which in short basically doubles most classes' DPS. The issue with this is, now that all damage dealers are doing double DPS, yes, tanks got that, but when you double 20 mil to 40 mil, and then when you double 100 mil to 200 mil, 200 mil is a lot more increase than 40 mil. Therefore, the devs never calculated how to generate aggro. Therefore, since aggro generation was not doubled, tanks are consistently losing aggro. And yes, not all tanks are consistently losing aggro, but there is this huge issue where now if there's someone just gear score a bit higher than a tank, the tank's going to be playing basically Shout Simulator. So that's something that I think should be balanced and worked on. I'm not saying DPS shouldn't hit these numbers. I'm not saying tanks should hit higher numbers. I just think that they overlooked the aggro generation part of tanks and really how much that change cost. The next thing we're going to go over is Medigation Changes, because this works hand in hand with damage. Since damage was changed to be flat increase, Medigation was also changed to be a flat increase. And believe it or not, what this kind of has done is it basically did the reverse effect as damage. Since damage now is calculated as increments, well, Medigation is now also, instead of bundled, counted as increments. And this kind of actually caused, like I said, a reverse effect, meaning damage mitigation now is going through some severe diminished returns factors. Therefore, instead of 80% damage mitigation being 80% damage mitigation, it's now literally like 16 or 24%, because 8% of 8% of 8% is not what it was before. Therefore, bosses are hitting much harder. Personally, this isn't a bad thing. I think this is a good thing. This is actually a change I like. I think this does add a more challenge to the game and should stay. This is not something that needs to change. This is probably the first thing I'm talking about that I'm happy about. Not that I'm not happy about the damage increase, it's just it wasn't thought out all the way, and this is a common factor of the Terra devs. The next thing is CDR. For a lot of players who haven't been around for a while, cooldown reduction was always noted to be, wow, a lot of classes are only building souls, the game's becoming too easy. This has finally changed almost. It's not fully changed, as yes, you can still build a ton of CDR, but due to the damage changes and the way Stigmas work in that damage change, it is more common for most, not all, but most classes to actually want to build attack Stigmas, therefore not giving classes a ton of soul or a ton of CDR. Again, you can still build it, it's just not the highest DPS, which now has reduced the issue of permanent cooldowns. Yes, it's still in the game, but it's not as much of an issue. Where it does kind of become an issue, for those that haven't kept up with it, and where I thought it became an issue is, well, survivability skills are still affected and would still be utilized. Yes, that is a thing, but believe it or not, with the higher tier dungeons, a lot of these skills don't actually work against boss mechanics. In other words, if we go over Bahar waves, well, having permanent iframes isn't going to protect you against that mech, because it's actually not a mech that can be iframed, it has to be maneuvered around. And it's the same thing with like puddles and all sorts of stuff, from Crimson Killing Grounds, and these other dungeons, that we are almost at a point that the CDR meta is finally been resolved. So that is actually something I'm really happy to hear about, that it has been moving in this way. So that's all some really good stuff that has changed, and I'm glad that the devs finally made these changes. The things that I would like them to do are now what I'm going to cover, and that is changes in gear. And most of this is enchanting changes. For the last few times I did what Terra console needs, changes should happen to Terra console video, enchanting is something that always comes up. And one thing I said last year was like a boon or a safeguard system where, you know, you farm all this time to get these materials, and when you're near this end game of Kaia's annihilation, you know, even when Fraxum was the final gear to +9, it wasn't as bad as it is now, and it just keeps getting worse. There's always the system of having this boon or safeguard in some games where basically you farm out the material and you use this item that protects your mats from getting used up. I could see that being something they do. It could be a cool idea. If they put it in the store, they can make some money off of it, or make it drop from the hardest dungeons would be also a neat idea. The other idea that was always brought up to me that I really liked was using extra materials. In other words, let's say your enchant chance is 10%, because we're at these low numbers. Why not allow the person to use 10 times the materials to bring it up to like 90 or 100% chance? Yes, your grind would be 10 times longer, you wouldn't have to go that route, but it could be a cool option that you grind more to guarantee your enchant. That is another idea that I've always liked and thought would be cool. The third option, which I feel like is the option the devs have already released and said they're going to go about, is bringing back item XP. Now, there's two methods of bringing item XP back. The old school system, which is probably what's going to happen, where you can grind X amount of item XP and your enchant goes from 10 to maybe 15, 20, 30%. If they bring it back this way, I hope they're smart about it. I hope that they make it a reasonable amount of item XP that gives a % chance. I'm gonna be honest, if it is grind 2 million item XP to get an extra 5% when your fails only give you a 0.08, that does not help. That is not something that's going to help, and I'm afraid that that is the route the devs are taking. Again, we don't know because they haven't released that much information about it. But if they do that, that will be bad. Now, if they do it where you complete roughly 45 dungeons, you know, that would be 15 sets of 3, 15 days of Bahar, and bring you to max item XP and give you about 30 to 45% chance. Plus, if your fails bring you up a bit more, you would almost be at roughly 50%. 30 to 50%, let's say, with fails. That would not be as bad. You know, that would be kind of acceptable, because after that point, you're almost at a 50-50. You're at a coin flip. Again, I know it doesn't work for everyone that way. I've known people that get to 90% and they still fail like 5 times. So, the other concept to item XP that I personally would love to see if they did, but I don't think the console devs will ever do this, but I've seen a lot of fan servers do it, and it personally I think works out to almost one of the best, is that item XP, they would just calculate the amount of item XP you would need to get to 100%. Now, personally, I think if they make it 20 million item XP or something ridiculous to where, like, yes, you do, you know, earlier we said 45 runs brings you up to like 40 to 50%. 90 runs brings you up to 100%. I think people would like that. I think that would be a decent way to go as well. Again, some people might not like the concept of 100% because now all you have to do is grind out your item XP. But I would just say they just have to balance the dungeons appropriately. Make Bahar and the raid give the most amount and make it equivalent. Like, you don't want people to run Ravenous Gorge to get their item XP. Make them want to run the dungeons in their set so that it fills up quicker so they can hit that 100%. I also know a lot of console players were not used to having 100%. So a lot of console players, I guarantee you, would still be enchanting at 30-40% where we're used to HO gear being at, where we're used to that Fraxome gear being at, because we still want our enchant as soon as possible. So why not take the chance? But at least then having that item XP build and build and build to 100%, you know, that at least is a forward progression that I think most players can be happy with. So that is the gear for just armor and weapon and just enchanting in general for that stuff. I do want to cover something that needs to be changed in enchanting, which is the getting to Kaia's Brooch, Circlet, and the Suppress God's Bracelet. These three items are god-awful. For anyone that has them and doesn't enchant them or doesn't have to enchant them, count your blessings. For anyone who has alts or does have to enchant these items, they need to be reworked. The Brooch and Circlet are roughly start 20%. When you fail, it goes to 1%. You get 1% increase, so a fail is 20 to 21%. And it costs you 200,000 gold, and it costs you 100 of the blue fragments. That is 10 yellow fragments. That is way too much, in my opinion, for a piece of jewelry. It's not even as good as the Kaia's jewelry in a way. Like, I think this is terrible. I think they need to either lower the material and gold requirement, or they need to increase the success rate. Make it 5 to 10% a fail. Give it item XP and have it increase to like 50%. Like, this is honestly really bad. Continuing forward, the Suppressed God's Bracelet is even worse because it's 100,000 gold, 1 Godstone, which is kind of annoying to get, but if you're running a lot, you will accumulate a good amount. What I don't like on this one is that not only can it enchant to 15, you don't get any percent when you fail. And I don't know how worse it gets after you get +1, because I don't have a +1/1. So if that percent, like most things, goes down as the enchant goes up, that's just bad. That's bad working. So that stuff needs to be seriously reworked. Going into Stigmas, I'm glad to see soul versus attack is getting worked out where people should want to run attacks now. That's a great change. The next 2 changes I would like to see with Stigmas to go along with this is 1, a conversion stone. Allow people who have had +5 souls to convert a few of them to attacks. And you know what? I think a conversion stone will allow players to be able to also play with their Stigmas a bit more. Try out attacks, try out defense. People who tried out attacks could go to souls. And sure, if you have like a god tier or an S tier Stigma, you might not want to convert that one. But what's the chances all 7 of your Stigmas are that superior that you can't convert one to try out the others a bit better. So I think a conversion stone would be fantastic. I think they should also change the way stigmas are rolled and kind of make them similar to pets, where you can pick your old roll or pick your new roll. When they did that for pets and they haven't incorporated it into stigmas, that's something that I feel should be done, because truthfully, it's just overall a good concept. And I don't know why they haven't done it. It's something that it's forward progression again. I always like to think what's forward progression. The next thing we're going to cover is runes. Runes are really neat. They're the new crystal for weapon and armor, and they add some pretty nice damaging stats and stuff. But the one thing that runes lacks is that when you finally get a +3 rune and you roll it 5 times, you can't re-roll it anymore. You have to throw it away or just accept what you have. This kind of is just something, again, I'm not a fan of, because it's very... It hard locks you. You get something that's maybe either good or trash, not the perfect rules, and now you gotta fight. Do I keep it till I get something better? And just having that limit of 5 rolls on it is kind of bad, and you have to put resources into it. So personally, I think if they don't want to make it unlimited rolls, which I understand since you can lock your rolls, making it unlimited might be a little much, but they should at least increase the rolls. And the idea Deezy and I were coming up with was make it have 15 rolls. Deezy felt that 15 rolls would actually be a good amount of rerolls. And then I said, well, since it enchants 3 times, why not allow players to get 5 rerolls every enchant? So when you get it to +1, you can reroll that 5 times. Yes, you would still use materials to do it, but now you get 5. You get it to +2, you get an additional 5. Maybe you don't use all your first 5, let them roll over. Once you get it to 3, now you get your full 15 rerolls, and while you're trying to enchant it from 1 to 2, 2 to 3, you can reroll it. So, personally, unlimited rerolls would be my favorite choice. It would be Deezy's favorite choice, but if they have to cap it because you can lock the rolls, allow it to be at least more than 5, because 5 is pretty pitiful. The last thing I want to talk about gear, and this doesn't really go into gear, it's more of an item, is the Vanguard tokens. Ever since they took the brooches out of these tokens, they're kind of pretty useless. The only 2 items that I think have kind of any value in there is your plates. And at this point, I don't know many people who are struggling on plates. If you are, let me know in the comment section. But personally, and then aged elo new tiers, which kind of goes into crafting. That's just not really utilized as much anymore. And maybe people are crafting to get their diamonds and plates and stuff, but again, the major part of these tokens was for the brooch, and it's gone from there. So maybe they should rework this token to offer some better items. Maybe these tokens can give pet books and card boxes or other important things. Might help with some of the issues. Again, things I wish the devs considered. So that is the major stuff in the game. The last thing I want to talk about is the devs. Overall, the devs have made some decent changes, as I've said throughout this video. And even throughout my last few videos, I've noticed the devs have been doing some decent work on the game. But I'm not going to give them that pass. I still don't think they do enough. I don't think they care about the community as much as they would like to let on. And the biggest thing right now is they don't think. You know, the one thing they did great was class balancing. A lot of the DPS are balanced almost. sure, you still got some of your burst classes that do a ton more at burst, but when their burst runs out, they fall off a bit, while sustained is still pretty decent. And it doesn't feel like really many DPS outshine other DPS as much as it used to. But the fact that they didn't balance tanks with the DPSs just shows that they're still lacking the care and the knowledge, which leads me into that they don't make original content. And that's something I think at this point they really need to start focusing on. Because if they want this game to flourish and grow, and to have more people come, and obviously they want money, I would think they should really consider what can we do to make more players want to play. And, you know, releasing the PC content, really just even releasing it and making changes to it, I don't think is going to keep the game, because PC failed for a reason. And it was because the lack of work being put into it. Terra console is going to fail. Eventually there will be a console MMO that will destroy it. When? I don't know. Maybe not for a long time, but if they just picked up the pace, it would be so much better. And I think they have the skills to do it. I don't think they have the drive to do it. But we'll see. Hopefully they prove me wrong. Other than that, that is the end of this video. If you want to check me out when I'm live streaming, feel free to drop by anytime at Twitch, where I will be streaming Terra on Mondays, possibly some other games on Mondays as well. Wednesday or Thursday, I'm usually streaming a Pokemon, whether it's Pokemon Legends of Arceus or card openings, anything along the Pokemon lines. My streams start typically anywhere from like 6 p.m. to 8 p.m. is roughly the start point. So that's about it. Hope you enjoyed. Let me know in the comments section if y'all have any questions or just interesting facts you want to throw out about Terra that I've missed since I've been gone. And that's about it. Hope you have a wonderful night. Or day. I don't know when you're watching this video. I'm recording it at 2 in the morning because I'm crazy. Alright, peace y'all.